We move on now to the concluding panel for today, which is going to be moderated by Billy Nauman. Billy is a reporter and producer in Financial Times in the Moral Money digital platform and newsletter. This is a platform exclusively devoted to ESG. So when we were setting up the program, we thought that Billy would be the natural candidate to moderate this. So Billy, thanks a lot for accepting this invitation. Just to say that Billy in the past has also been a managing editor for Fundfire, which is the daily publication of Financial Times covering US institutional investors. And Billy is a graduate of Florida State University. So Billy, the next 60 minutes belong to you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, George. Thank you for that introduction. And thank you to all of our audience members for joining and all of our panelists. I think we've got a great session ahead of us. So the topic for this panel is pretty broad, right? It's institutional investors and regulation. And there's a lot of different ways we can go with this. But I think, to start out, we need to kind of set the stage and talk about what sort of regulation is coming into place and what sort of regulation institutional investors need to be considering. There's multiple efforts going on at the EU level, not so much over here in the US, but we all have heard of things like CSRD, SFDR, IFFR-EBRD, then there's the IFRS, ISSB. There's this alphabet soup of different regulations that I think are all kind of pulling in the same direction. There may be some conflicts between some of them. There may be some disagreements here and there, but it's all sort of pushing in the direction of setting some standards around ESG, mostly around ESG disclosure, around ESG labeling. But I think to get into that, I'd like to first go to one of our panelists, Vasiliki Lazaroku. I'm really sorry. I'm bad with names. So my apologies to every panelist whose name I will probably mispronounce. She is the chair of the JSD Hellenic Capital Market Commission, and she is. We'd like to start with her to kind of set the ground for this panel and tell us a little bit about the EU Action Plan on Sustainable Finance and what sort of legislation, what sort of regulations are coming into play that are going to affect institutional investors and how they need to be thinking about these issues. I'll go ahead, before we turn to her though, I will introduce the rest of our panelists and remind our audience to please send in your questions. We'd like to dedicate the last 20 minutes of the presentation to questions and answers. So please get those coming in. I know there's a bunch of you out there, so let them rip. Our other panelists, we have Gabriel Karageorgiou, I'm terribly sorry, from Arabesque Asset Management. He's a partner at Arabesque Asset Management. We have Michael Andreidis from the Athens Exchange Group, and Venetia Kosu, Dr. Venetia Kosu, Director General on the Council on Competitiveness of Greece. And I think you all bring really interesting, diverse perspectives to this panel. So I can't wait to hear from all of you. But Vasiliki, please, if you could kick us off, just telling us a little bit about the regulations that are coming into place and what institutional investors need to be looking out for.
Thank you, Bill. And actually, I would like to start by congratulating both the IFFR and EBRD for this very interesting conference, because for me, ESG is one of the most important issues right now. And I think we should all raise awareness regarding ESG and how these criteria, environmental, social, and governance criteria, are being implemented into our everyday life and how this will continue. So congratulations to both of them. And I would like to start by saying, first of all, that we all know that Europe committed, and actually I'm going to answer one of the last question that I heard in the previous panel. But let me start by saying that we all know that Europe committed to the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And in 2019, the European Green Deal was published. So important EU regulations are already in force, and I will tell which are those. And some of them are under examination with a view for achieving the sustainability goals of ESG. Now, and the climate neutral, of course, Europe until 2050. the integration of the sustainability considerations into the EU financial policy framework are presented in the European Action Plan on Sustainable Finance and in the EU Sustainable Finance Strategy, which is already under revision now. So the European legislation now on ESG should be seen, in my view, as a uniform framework consisting of different legislator pieces, and all regulatory efforts should be vested in this direction. So let's see which are those pieces of legislation. Before I go there, maybe I should mention that many studies have reported that there was a strong evidence of financial short-termism, and this is one of the reasons that there is a need to change this investing culture to a more sustainable one. And currently, we see that all those ESG products, there is a growing trend for those in capital markets, as also evidenced by the ESMA biannual reports on trends, risks, and vulnerabilities. However, there is the risk of greenwashing, which is to mislead the investing public on the sustainable characteristics of an investment, which is already a need for having investor protection. So after saying, let's say, all these reasons for which we need to embrace this ESG criteria, and we need to make sure that we proceed to correct, let's say, legislation, let's see which is the existing regulation right now. So first, we have the taxonomy regulation. Also, we have the SFDR, the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, the regulation of sustainability benchmarks, and more recently, we have the proposal for a regulation, which is the amendment of Directive on Corporate Sustainability Reporting, which was known until now, as you mentioned, the NFDR. So let's see which are those pieces of legislation. First of all, the SFDR, which most part of it is already applies from 10th of March 2021. So the SFDR tries to harmonizes the rules for the financial market participants and financial advisors on transparency with regard to the integration of sustainability risks and the consideration of adverse sustainability impacts in the processes, as well as the provision of sustainability-related information with respect to financial products. So as I said, most of the articles already apply. Also, we need to mention that the three ESAs, the three European supervisory authorities, have already published the RTSs, the draft regulatory technical standards, but those RTSs, which are necessary to be, let's say, adopted by the European bodies, the Parliament and the Council, need, in order to have a concrete framework regarding SFDR, those standards have not yet been adopted. However, the three ESAs came and said that, look, although they have not been adopted officially, the market participants should use them as the basic guidance in order to make sure that they proceed to the necessary disclosures from the 1st of January 2022. Because SFDR has two, let's say, dates of starting the application for the disclosures. The one is the 1st of January 2022, and the other one is on the 1st of January 2023, where we are going to have more detailed information, more detailed disclosures about the financial products. Now, the second one is the taxonomy regulation. The taxonomy regulation has introduced, in addition to SFDR framework, more obligations, which are, first of all, it has defined the 6 environmental objectives, such as the climate change mitigation, the climate change adaptation, the sustainable use and protection of water and marine resources, the transition to a circular economy, pollution prevention and control, the protection and restoration of biodiversity and ecosystems. So we have these 6 environmental, let's say, objectives. 2 of them are going to start being applied from the 1st of January 2022, and the other 4, 2023. Now, also it mentions, there has provisions for improved disclosure of non-financial information. The Article 8, the well-known Article 8 of the Taxonomy Regulation, which obliges the undertakings which are under the NFDR to publish information on how and to what extent their activities are associated with economic activities that qualify as environmentally sustainable under the taxonomy regulation. Furthermore, as I mentioned, we have the proposal on the corporate sustainability reporting, which also came, let's say, in order to improve after the European Green Deal, the disclosure of non-financial information, since users of this information, mainly the investors, of course, are demanding more and better information from companies about their social and environmental performance and impacts. So we have—
That's a lot. There's a lot going on. I mean, yeah, sorry, is there more? Because
only one phase, more is coming, because all this will lead to changes in other legislation as well in Europe, such as MiFID, etc. So
right.
It's about regulation.
So there are two aims, as I understand it, with a lot of this regulation. One is to get better information on what these ESG investments are actually doing. You mentioned greenwashing. Kind of the taxonomy, I know, is very focused on rooting out greenwashing. There are some issues there that we can get into around controversies over the inclusion of certain fossil fuels or nuclear or whatever it may be as green or not. But at the end of the day, I think the point is basically to make sure that if you buy something that says it's ESG, you know what that actually means. But there's also a kind of dual incentive behind a lot of this, right? Which is to encourage more money to go into these funds. There's a dual goal for the regulations coming out. Gabriel, I'd like to come to you next and get your perspective from the asset management world at Arabesque. Because on one hand, I've heard a lot from asset managers about the amount of extra work this is creating. I've had managers in Europe tell me they've got more people dedicated to SFDR compliance than they did to MiFID II, which is saying something. But on the other hand, if you are an ESG investor and you are integrating ESG principles into your investment products, I would think that the improved disclosure regimes around CSRD or NFDR would make your jobs a little bit easier in terms of getting the information you need from companies that are going into those portfolios. But I'd love to get your perspective on, kind of how this is taking shape. Is it creating too much work for the asset management world? Is it going to help achieve the goal of both cleaning up, the ESG labeling and promoting more money to go into sustainable companies?
Absolutely, and thank you, Billy, and also allow me also to thank IFFR and EBRD and George for the kind invitation. Allow me also to start with the rationale why probably we have this kind of regulation coming our way over the past years, and you're absolutely right. Two out of, in my mind, three reasons is, as you said, the greenwashing, so protect the consumers. Secondly, it's about mobilizing capital towards a more sustainable economy. And the third, and to connect it also with how we do it here at Arabesque, is the realization of importance. I think the regulator realized that non-financial information does have financial implications. And at some point, somebody had to do something about it. And it's great to have the regulator coming in and saying, yes, guys, now we need to take this thing seriously. Definitely, we are not lacking of regulatory acronyms at the moment that asset managers, corporates, and asset owners need to follow, which creates a little bit of a confusion. But at the same time, as you pointed, Billy, it will ultimately make the life of asset managers and corporates hopefully easier in the years to come. And where I would like to start in order to answer your question is from the fact that for us, at least at Arabesque, ESG was never a tick box exercise. We never saw ESG and sustainability as something that we need to tick the box in order to comply with SFDR because we want our fund to be classified as Article 8 and 9. ESG integration was always from the very, very beginning at the very, very core of our investment philosophy, purely because we fundamentally believe that that by integrating this kind of topics in the way that we are allocating capital, we can improve our information environment, and thus we can take better informed financial decisions for our clients. So definitely, since we started, we had experienced all these challenges that asset managers involved in ESG had been facing over the past 10 years, which have to do around data quality and data quantity. And we have been trying to address them ourselves to a very good extent. So we started as a company that was utilizing scores from external providers. Currently, Arabesque is an asset management firm, but it is also a data firm. And one of our biggest operations has to do around data, ESG data collection and ESG and sustainability assessment of companies. But as you said, by having this kind of frameworks, this kind of guidance coming from regulators and other initiatives that allows companies to understand this is what you need to measure, this is what you need to report, this is how you need to measure it, and this is to whom and to whom you have to provide this information, and these are the means with which you need to provide this information. Definitely at some point it's going to make the work of both corporates and asset managers much better. Right now the problem is that there is a lot of data out there, they are unaudited, they are unstructured, and that's why the market, I would say, it's quite inefficient, and that's why it also creates quite a lot of opportunities for asset managers who have demystified this kind of landscape of ESG data, and they have identified the ways to integrate it in their investment processes. So, as it was said also in the previous panel, I firmly believe that in a few years' time, the ESG disclosure and reporting space is going to be where the financial reporting landscape is today. And let's not forget that just 50 years ago, we didn't have standardized financial reporting. Definitely, there are a lot of important people and important institutions involved that they want to take us there. And we as Arabesque, we try to facilitate this transition as well with a lot of different initiatives we are involved in.
That's a really interesting point. That's something we've been hearing a lot about, right? Like the kind of just shift in the perception of what is relevant, what is material data for investors on companies, and kind of the shifting perception that even if it's not on an annual report, it could actually be important information that you need. You brought up the fact that it's unaudited, which is something I'd like to come back to, because I think that is one of the challenges right now as it stands for anyone trying to get a good sense of what a company is actually doing. I mean, you can take their word for it, and sometimes they have some level of limited assurance, but I feel like that's an important key. So I'm glad you brought that up. Before that, though, I'd like to come next to Venetia. And Venetia, I'd like to get your perspective, on, in your role as the Director General on the Council of Competitiveness of Greece. It's all, this regulation is going to start forcing a lot of disclosure from publicly listed companies. Is there a problem, though, with companies that are not publicly listed, that in getting them to start disclosing this type of information, making sure that every company out of the market, especially in a place like Greece, where so many companies are small and medium-sized enterprises that may not be compelled to do this by investors or by regulators, to get them to disclose ESG information and not treat it as a tick-the-box exercise? How is that being factored into all of this?
Good afternoon and good morning for those that they are in other continents. Thank you, Billy. Thank you, dear organizers, for having included me in this very interesting discussion, which is part of the wider attempt, I believe, of the developed world to refocus and redesign the business model. Dear Bill, I would like to start my answer talking about a little bit competitiveness, and then coming out to the small, if you don't mind.
Absolutely, by all means.
We know that in the Davos language, and according to Klaus Schwab, the basic precondition to sustain prosperous growth and development, we need to care for all the stakeholders and not just for the shareholders. And I think here lies still a problem. And since the trend is not new, some are calling it new capitalism or the stakeholders' capitalism. As we have said from Vasiliki, the UN 2030 and the others, I'm emphasizing on the triple bottom line sustainability a lot, that it is more said than practiced. We know that following a recent survey, at least from BNP, 75% of the retail and institutional investors apply these ESG principles to at least a quarter of their portfolios. And 52 of ESG investment decisions were motivated by a promise of improved long-term return. So we know all that. Okay, the investment community is coming to recognize that doing good creates profits. It's critical to do well financially. But whatever you don't measure, you cannot manage it. I mean, it was previously said, and I believe in that. Okay, that's why competitiveness is very crucial, because competitiveness means that we compare rankings of the various countries among them. It doesn't matter, I mean, we do not compare Greece versus Pakistan, but generally, I mean, we compare Greece versus its neighbors, because the globalization has shrunk down to the islandization, especially after the pandemic, and we need to be sure as investors, because they are moving now, so we need to continue comparing. So comparison, is it good? But we are talking of introducing new standards. What about not following or not respecting the existing standards? Because according to the Global Competitiveness Report, at least, Greece ranks 138 among the 141 countries in the respect of, as far as auditing and accounting principles are concerned. So if we do not respect them, that it is by far known that we should have respected them because it is financial, tangible, how we are going to convince the companies, and especially that those that they have faced serious financial problems with the pandemic, not to mention the 10 years financial crisis in Greece, to disrupt their business, because if they don't disrupt it, they are not going to make it ESG wise. And we are also not so good in disruption. I mean, we do not embrace disruptive ideas in Greece, according to the same report. And according to the Readiness for Transformation report that it was published a few months ago and carried out with data of 2020, Greece ranked 30th among 37 countries, mostly OECD countries, as far as infrastructure is concerned, to accelerate energy transition, that it is related to ESG, and in providing the labor laws and social protection needed for the new economy. So 30 out of 37, it is not a very good rank. And it ranked 35th among the 37 as far as the existence of incentives to direct financial resources towards long-term investments and strengthen the stability and expand the inclusion. So that in mind, okay, I accept that the efforts of the present government might not have been taken into consideration while this report was compiled, but it shows a very heavy case in Greece about standards and readiness and all this that we talk now. Definitely, I would love these standards to be followed, because we are going to finish, I mean, they are going to replace all these CSR path releases. And I would like to say that in this transitional period, to come to your question, speed matters, because since we are in comparison, some others might do it faster. And
it sounds like a big challenge, right? You've got this
it's
environment in which, you know, even you know, regular IASB accounting standards are not always respected. What case can be made to companies that they need to do this? I mean, is there something markets can do? Is it, you know, lending, banks won't lend to them, or is it something the regulators need to really crack down on? Or how do you see the case being made that that they should do this, that they should spend their time filling out these forms and filling them out truthfully and honestly?
I think that first of all, it is a cultural problem, and we all know that culture is strategy for breakfast. I mean, if people do not see what's in it for them, no matter what we are preaching here, and no matter how much EU legislates, you know, the joke that China produces, US innovates, and EU legislates. So all this legislatory work is fine, but we need to convince what's in it for them. And we need, in order to convince them, and because it is a complicated issue, we need to convince about the role and the importance of partnership, because not anyone alone can do that. And we do have this challenge in Greece as well. We are not so willing in creating partnerships, and we do not have the clusters. I mean, we do not have the scientific boards with us. And sit down and discuss honestly. So first of all, since it is a transformation journey and since it is a cultural, we need to put as a priority to educate about the why, so that everybody understands and believes that what's in it for me. Definitely, you cannot, I mean, you need to have a system, and they need to understand that if they do not comply with some issues, they are not going to be financed. But also, there should be a listening eye from the government or the institutions, what exactly they need. Because there are some efforts to finance, let's say, the very small companies just to survive, without paying any attention to what they do. I don't think that if this happens, helps from the direction that we have just said. And ticking the box will be, I mean, it's a lot of education here. Previously, they have said about engagement. If you do not believe what you are doing, you will not be engaged, and nobody can be with a gun.
Great. Well, that's a huge challenge. Michael, I'd like to come to you. We've not yet heard from you. And I think that this is a great point to bring you in, because, you know, I'd like to hear about what exchanges can do, what you've done at the Athens Exchange around ESG, what you're planning to do. You know, I'm thinking about like an initiative launched by NASDAQ not too long ago, where NASDAQ has said companies that are listing on NASDAQ need to have, you know, X% of board members be women or of diverse backgrounds. We've seen exchanges in Taiwan start to implement some ESG, you know, rules around companies listing on that exchange. How do exchanges play into this, and what role can the exchange in Athens play in promoting, you know, more ESG?
Yeah. Thank you, Billy, and thanks a lot the organizers for this very, very interesting webinar they organized. So I would say from the point of the exchange, I mean, we started dealing with the ESG issues since 2018. And our first move was to join the Sustainable Stock Exchange Initiative. That was actually and is an initiative followed by more than 100 exchanges all around the globe. It's actually an initiative under United Nations Partnership Program. And the main mission of this is to provide a global platform for exploring how exchanges, in collaboration with investors, issuers, regulators, policymakers, and relevant international organizations, can enhance performance on ESG issues and encourage sustainable investment. That it's made mission and we become part of it in 2018. Now, I've heard a lot about educating. I've heard a lot about how the companies will manage to handle the ESG. I would like to mention the fact that the ESG seems to be definitely a must-have for the listed issuers. But I would like to pinpoint that even here in Greece, and I'm sure the same actually applies all over Europe, one bank after the other applies ESG rules when they provide lending to their borrowers. So when they provide credit to their lenders. So I think the banks can play a crucial role on this. Now, furthermore, in 2019, I mean, we provided and we published an ESG guide, which was a very important step in association with an external well-known advisor. And the same year, actually, we've collected all the data from the listed companies that they have published ESG data. And we have made a very thorough study on what's the status of the issue of the listed companies in the Athens Exchange. The next year, we did the same in cooperation with the institutional investors locally and the National and Kapodistrias University of Athens. So we ran a questionnaire to all listed companies, and at the same time, we ran a survey, we collected all the data, and we made a comparison between the 2019-2018. I have to say that was quite encouraging, definitely more encouraging from what Vanessa mentioned before for the rest of the companies in Greece. And we've seen improvement between these 2 years. Actually, we have run, because actually the institutional investor, as Mr. Karagiorgiou mentioned before, they want to know, and they want to know for sure if a company is ESG compliant or not, and what is the compliance level of each company. So we have made a ranking. So we have a rating among all the listed companies that reply to us. And I have to say it was almost 2/3 of the listed companies replied to this questionnaire and the survey we ran after that. And now we are in the process of, we are validating all these data, and we have next moves that will follow. So, and will of course include the education on our behalf, because the motivation of the ecosystem is one of our main initiatives. We want the whole ecosystem to be motivated on ESG, because ESG, as we all know, is the mega trend of the capital markets. And that is here to stay, and it's going to become even bigger, taking into consideration the fact that the US is rather laggard in ESG issues. But with the change of the administration in the US, I think that these matters will matter much more for the US companies. So they have a lot of more room for the US companies and the US investors to follow. Definitely, EU seems to be much more ahead on all three issues of the ESG.
Great, thank you very much. Well, I'm just taking a look at our time. We've got about 5 minutes, so we wanted to get to the Q&A. But one of the questions that just came in, and sorry, it doesn't have a name on it, so I don't know who asked it, but it kind of touched on what we were just talking about with Michael and Venetia. And I'd like to hear from the rest of the group about how do we get non-listed companies to adopt ESG practices? Because I think there is a problem there, you know, especially with what we've seen in the concentration of, or in the move from public to private markets with a lot of companies. And we always hear about the danger that, you know, companies that have dirty assets, that have, you know, these fossil fuel assets, well, they'll just sell them off. They'll sell them off to a private buyer, and then nobody will know about it. And it'll just be operating kind of outside the realm of, you know, where investors and regulators are able to put more pressure on listed companies. Is there a way, you know, to the group, is there a way to make non-listed companies adopt ESG practices?
I think yes, if I may reply on this. I don't know who's going to whom this is applied. I would say that, as I mentioned before, if the banking system follows the ESG rules, in this case, all companies, listed and non-listed, will have to follow the rule. So that's the only way for making even the smaller businesses to think about sustainability of their profits, actually, because this is what we're talking about. I mean, we have a new capitalism era, actually, because we left from an era 20 years ago when we were talking about maximizing shareholders' profits to maximizing sustainable profits for the shareholders. And sustainable means engaging the community, engaging factors that have to do with the environment and stuff like this we're discussing. And towards this direction, I would like to say that the exchange is planning to educate the ecosystem. We are planning next month actually to run a C-suite level seminar for all the listed companies, and not only for that. And in order to further mobilize at least the listed companies, we are going to have a segment of the market by autumn, so that we'll have an ESG segment market according to standard specific criteria. And we plan actually to launch an ESG index as well. So we want the system to be motivated heavily towards this direction.
I believe that the investors and consumers are pushing towards ESG. CEOs are rather reluctant because first they have the profits, and then they have the knowledge that these disruptions are not always successful. At least I'm talking about the data that I have globally. And I think we should help them not only impose what the banks want. This is one way to do it. It is not incentive, it's enforcement. But the second thing is to help them understand how to make bold strategic choices. And I think the boards have a role to play on that. How to reinvent the products and go towards sustainable innovation. For example, the dry products that have lesser emissions on carbon, and so, meaning that they have to cooperate with academia and the experts, how to rethink on their operation channels. I mean, we need to provide them ways to disrupt their models, or they will be disrupted by someone else, and assist all small business that they shouldn't be left out of the game, what to do with the high costs of their raw material and services. We know that in Greece, electricity is much higher than the others, so we need to give them both financial and knowledge, let's say, not just to educate why ESG is a good thing.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Vasiliki, would you like to add to that?
Actually, I want to add something, because for me, ESG is something which has to do with having socially, environmentally, and socially responsible companies. So when the companies realize that this is what the consumers need, when they understand that this is the demand of the consumers, then they can adjust everything, their policies, their business, the industry, everything can adjust to this. As far as they don't believe in this, in the risk that the climate change may have, or things like that, or that they don't believe that they need to adjust all their culture in order to make sure that they embrace this ESG, then we cannot do anything. But I want to say this because for listed companies is something which is even more, because for listed companies, we also have the investors, and the investors need to make sure that they go and invest in a company, as Gabriel said, that has transparency, that has good governance, etc. So this is why all regulations are taking steps in order to ensure that the companies, which are at least listed companies, they can, let's say, satisfy the ESG criteria. And for me, this is very important. And I think we all need in the market to raise awareness to listed companies and to market participants regarding all these criteria. First of all, because of the essence, because we need to change the whole culture to make sure that we proceed to something like that. And second, because whenever a company does something like that, then we need to make sure that this is known to the investors by disclosures, because this is why we need disclosures, so that then they are more attractive to investors, and then they can be more competitive, because this is something that in the index of competitiveness will make a difference. Thank you.
That makes a lot of sense. Gabriel, would you like to add something as well?
Absolutely, I will echo Vasiliki's comments. And I would start actually with the following. I would say that everything has to do with education. It doesn't matter if you are a listed company or a family business. In my mind, ESG is a term that has become fancy over the past few years, but at the end of the day, ESG is all about good management quality and good corporate strategy. Ultimately, I believe in a few years' time, we will not be talking about ESG as a separate theme, but it will be what I would like to call corporate finance version 2. It will be embedded within corporate finance. So the moment that even the smaller businesses understand that how you treat your employees makes a difference. Take your local restaurant place. If you do not treat your waiters in a good manner, they will go to your competitor. It's just things like that that people need to relate with their own businesses. And with that, then I think this is the way to for the smaller business to adopt it. The second way that I would add, if you allow me, Billy, very quickly, has to do with enforcement as well. This time it's not going to be from an investor. So if you are a listed company, you have the investor saying, I need the data, and I need the data because the asset owner needs the data, otherwise there is no money for you. For the smaller business, what the chain is going to be is that you are going to have the bigger corporate, that you are a member of its supply chain, and the big corporate is probably your biggest client, and now the big corporate will also need the data from you, the smaller business. And the reason why the bigger corporate will need it is because they need to disclose the information. So you will have this push not coming from the investor, but coming from your main client. So there will be this kind of additional dimension.
Yeah, we're seeing that a lot, like the power of big companies to influence the smaller companies in their supply chain. And, you know, sort of that's the trickle down effect, I guess, right? When the big companies have to disclose, they can't disclose that, getting the information from the small companies, and then that forces the small companies to disclose. I'm a little skeptical of the notion, and we hear this a lot in the ESG world, that consumers are going to make the choice of, if your restaurant doesn't treat your workers well, we're going to go somewhere else. There are often times where people, you know, A, don't have the information necessary to make that choice. And then B, I mean, I don't know, we see all the time, like over here, every time there's a ruling in favor of gig economy employees, you know, where forcing platforms like Uber or Lyft or Grubhub or whatever to treat them as, you know, employees with benefits, the stock price goes down, the investors don't like it. And I've yet to see, I don't know, I mean, I feel like you see every now and then there's like an uprising. There was like the delete Uber movement a couple of years ago, but I think everybody's back on the app now and still using it. So I wonder how much follow through there is from the consumers that actually say, and probably mean and probably do want to do the right thing. But anyway, we are at time for questions. So it's we got 15 minutes left. So please, to our audience, we've got a couple in right now, but please get your questions coming in. We'll try to get to as many as we can before the end of this in about 15 minutes. The first one that came in, I think, is a really good question, and I'd like to direct it to Vasiliki, because I think it touches on something that she and I spoke about before this panel in terms of the opportunities around some of this new ESG legislation. So this came in from Stojkovic Marjan, a senior project manager at the Frankfurt School of Finance and Management. Fresh from the news, and this did just come out right before this panel, Shell lost a court case that is requiring it to reduce its net CO2 emissions. And I need to verify these numbers, but this is what's in the question. Reduce its net CO2 emissions by 45% in 2030 compared to 2019, which would cover scopes 1 through 3. Certainly, what the court has ruled goes above and beyond the ambition that Shell set out in its climate plan that was approved by investors just about a week ago. The question, though, and I think this is what's really important, is, you know, there's two ways to look at this, right? This is creating the potential for stranded assets that could harm fossil fuel companies and the financial institutions that work with them. But is there also an opportunity on the other side in terms of transition financing or ESG financing, ESG-linked bonds, sustainability-linked bonds? How do you see this sort of ruling and other, you know, if this does spur other jurisdictions to crack down on oil majors, how do you kind of see the risks and opportunities playing out from this, Vasiliki?
First of all, you mentioned, and I agree, that you mentioned about the information. Actually, you mentioned something about the data availability, whether we have data or not. So this is one of the issues that the regulation, let's say, comes and enforces everybody to provide with the data and then provide with disclosure, because this is one of the main challenges, opportunity for a company to get known about its activities, whether it's climate neutral or not, whatever. And then there is also a challenge because we need to see whether, first of all, we're going to have available data. Second, how this data is going to be presented. Third, how are they going to be rated? And actually, ESMA, together with the other European authorities, sent a letter to the Commission regarding the way that these can be rated and how they can be, all this information, how they can be shown to the public. Plus, we have also other, let's say, challenges, if I may say, because, for example, right now we are working on the legislation, but still there is not the level 2. So there is a lot of drafting still to be made. We also need to make sure that there is a uniform, let's say, tackling of all the issues, not only the environmental, which is already ahead, but also regarding the S, the social, and regarding the governance. In Greece, at least, we have taken some steps regarding the governance because we have a new corporate governance law. But S, what about S? Do we include also the effects of the pandemic? Do we include the social and employee matters, as Gabriel, I think, mentioned? Respect for human rights, everything, proportionality and materiality then. So we have all these challenges regarding all the label, the ESG label. Are we having a high quality ESG label? How are we going to reduce the divergence between all these? So the bonds, the green bonds, this is one major issue, because if we can have, now we are working on the standards, on the green bond standard in Europe. So if we are having, let's say, an easier financing, that will also help the real economy. So I guess this all have to be dealt with. These are the new challenges.
Yeah, no, big time. Would anyone else like to comment on that? The trade-offs between, as the path to net zero, the Paris Climate Agreement, as governments start to crack down on that, the trade-off between risks and opportunities and how investors and companies should be looking at that.
I would like, if I may, to add another aspect of this, just to remind to the audience and the fact that we are talking in Europe now about the ERF, the Recovery and Resilience Fund, which is a huge amount of money directed to all actually European governments. And for Greece, for example, this is something like 32 billion coming into the economy in the next 5 to 6 years. So the bulk of this has two directions. 57% of this money is going to go to digital and to green. So we've seen a huge amount of money that needs to be leveraged up, and at the same time needs to be equity needs to be added on this. And all this money, in order to be someone compliant to get the money, they have to do specific investments. So I think that yes, we have a huge carrot here for listed and non-listed that they have to deal with at least environmental issues. Yes, definitely it's not the whole ESG, but it's the environmental at least. And I believe this is a very big incentive for all the Greek companies, no matter what the size is, to see how they're going to absorb this money.
Great. We've got another question here from Floru Anita, the professor at Bocconi University. And I'll direct this one to Venetia. According to the current EU IFFR-EBRD, the Non-Financial Reporting Directive, listed companies are required to provide information regarding their anti-bribery mechanisms. As we all know, corruption imposes significant costs. How well do Greek companies do in this respect? In general, within and outside Greece, and then in general, within and outside Greece, what can be done to improve things?
Unfortunately, corruption is an issue. And if you see the map, having placed all these 37 countries that they were ready or not to transform, Greece didn't have a nice place. I decided to omit this because I'm the guy with the bad news here. I insist that we need to have the proper laws mandated by how the market performs and not only by the legislator, because we need to become transparent but modern as well. And the Greek legislation system needs to be improved and updated. But I also insist in the education and the lifelong learning, because it is not only the small companies that they need this. It is most of the people that need this in order to become a critical mass. The ESG is bring a revolution. And we need to see that as a revolution and not just hire an ESG expert and think that we are okay. As we did in the beginning of the century with the technological revolution, that companies were hiring a web developer or something like that. And because digital and sustainability go together, and not only if they go together, they can provide better financial outcomes. And unfortunately, the statistics say that the Asian markets do that better, not the Europeans, according to Accenture. So corruption, I mean, corporate governance, we do have from the Enrons, then we had some other scandals. We will always have scandals. The issue is that more and more people understand that the previous model has gone with the virus as well. I mean, it's obsolete. We need to find another model, and we need to get prepared for the new markets. And the employees need to be prepared, but also the companies.
Great.
We are here to see.
We certainly are. We're all waiting to see what happens. Gabriel, we've got a question here. I don't know, it doesn't have a name on it, but anyway. This one says, directed to you. So Anna Murray mentioned on the previous panel that they rely on internally computed ESG ratings. They manage $70 billion. Does this signal that they do not trust external ESG rating providers? And why might that be?
So that's a great question. I don't think it is necessarily driven by the fact that they do not trust external rating providers, but probably because they have their own specific definition of what ESG opportunities and risks are. That's exactly the same approach as we follow at Arabesque. We have our own proprietary models in order to assess the sustainability performance of companies across different dimensions. And especially in the real estate sector that Anne-Marie is involved in, things are also a little bit more complicated. So I don't think that it has to do with the fact that you do not trust external rating providers. Roberto, as you know, at MIT is leading a fantastic initiative with the Aggregate Confusion project, and he was discussing exactly that. So for me, it has to do purely with the definitions that investors have about sustainability. And for us, for example, at Arabesque, we have our own methods, and which we also make available to third parties as well through what we call Arabesque S-Ray. So that's, I think, something that a lot of different asset managers actually are following. And I would probably guess that as managers becoming more and more familiar with ESG data and how this information affects financial performance, you will see more and more asset managers looking not for ESG ratings, but they will be looking for raw ESG data in order to integrate in their capital allocation process. And that's why all the initiatives that have to do with disclosure and reporting are so important. And that's what we also as Arabesque try to facilitate from a raw data perspective.
Billy, if I may.
Go ahead.
What Gabriel said. I mean, yes, the case with the data and how ESG metrics are actually measured and what is the rating, how the rating is come is a huge issue. Which means that even on a EU regulation level, there's a lot of room, and there is a lot that needs to be done in order to make much more typical, like it's the government, the corporate governance, for example, or even the GRI. But definitely the social is far behind. So we as an exchange, we've seen this necessity for the fund managers. We've seen this necessity for the issuers as well. So we are in the middle of an effort, and we're trying to establish a platform that would be, first of all, easy for the issuers to upload the ESG data. And at the same time, we are trying to make an quite, let's say, automatically rating of the issuers depending on the data that they have uploaded. And as I said before, because we wanted to have, we already have a rating for 2019 for the listed companies, or those that have already published ESG data, and we have the National Kapodistri and Athens University to have the methodology as an independent, actually, advisor to us for having the rating. So for all these reasons that Gabriel mentioned, we want the third party to be sure that the job is done and it's done correctly.
Yeah, I think there's a potential problem though, right, with index investing. If ESG scores are meant to be just one input and people want the raw underlying ESG data to better make their decisions, the Aggregate Confusion Project is great. I've been following their work for a couple years now, and they show kind of the dispersion of how companies are rated by different ESG ratings providers. You talk to the rating provider and they say, oh yeah, well, you know, our score is just a score, and most people want they use it as one input in as they would a buy, sell, or hold rating from a sell side analyst, you know, a traditional sell side analyst. That's all well and good, but when you are building indices and you're building index funds that track those indices, the score kind of becomes the end all be all, right? That's the data that's used, and if we are on one hand saying that data is not great, and not that it's not great, but that it's not something that we should be using as an end all be all, but then you have the indexing problem. I don't know how you bridge that gap.
Oh, if I'm, Vasiliki.
Yeah, go ahead. Or yeah, Vasiliki, and then we'll go back to Gabriel.
I just want to give for 2 seconds a regulatory view regarding the ratings, because the problem is, the challenge that I mentioned earlier is the unregulated and unsupervised nature of the market for the ESG ratings and ESG assessment tools, and how there is a need to match the growth in demand for these products, of course, with appropriate, in my view, appropriate regulatory requirements to ensure that their quality and their reliability. And this is why ESMA mentioned in its letter to the Commission the need to have a common regulation on ESG raters, and the third-party providers of ESG assessments. So I agree with this point that you had. Plus, we also have the benchmark EU framework, which already provides an important basis for harmonized approach, enabling, let's say, the deep green characterization of financial products. So there are some attempts.
Gabriel?
Yes, and I will build on what Vasiliki was saying by saying that on the index front, you're absolutely correct, Billy. What the rating is what will be also defining the index. Going forward, though, my very personal opinion is that it's going, the indices that we are going to see, they will be justifiable by the raw data rather than based on the ambiguity of, you know, my rating or somebody else's rating, exactly because definitions are not universal. So going forward, I think the most important work that needs to be done has to do with disclosure and raw data, and then you will see more indices like the regulatory initiatives that we have on the climate front with a low carbon index and all this stuff that are based on data that we cannot argue against. They are measured in the same way.
Yeah. We've got a couple more here. We're running short on time. One came in from Joseph Insorello, an analyst at Nestor Advisors. I think we've kind of already answered this. It was about pushing non-listed SMEs toward ESG and highlighting how important they are. But I think we've already covered that. He did make another point, though, about what is being said about employees, not necessarily true, because in Southern Europe, there is the occupational blackmail. Since there are no jobs, employees don't leave their companies even if they're treated badly. I think that's, you know, that's universal. We see that here in the US across a lot of the country. So that's a very good point. Thank you for that, Joseph. We have a question from Charlie Blagbro from, he's a mortgage policy manager at BSA. And the question, when do you think the ESG taxonomy will be fully completed if it's taken so long to get to this point on green? If anyone would like to take a stab at that.
the taxonomy regulation is already, let's say, has been completed, has been adopted by the European, it is already a European legislation. What remains to be done are the level 2 legislation. Some has already been, there has been some process regarding some of it, but not all of it. So I guess it will be, at some point, it will be ready for the next year in order for all these disclosures to start from the 1st of January 2022. So I believe that it will soon be completed.
Great. And it looks like we have time for one more. This came in from Napolio Dekechneto. I apologize again. I'm bad with names. Talking about better management of ESG, environmental social factors, creating new opportunities, minimizing risk and decreasing costs. How is this? Is there a way that machine learning and AI is helping investors measure and manage this at a portfolio level?
Oh, Billy, if you allow me, I can
absolutely
give it a shot, because one of the core things that we are doing at Arabesque, so if someone was about to think of Arabesque, we are doing three things. Yes, asset management is at the very, very core, where we are bringing together two research capabilities that we have. One is on the sustainability research front, and the second one is on the artificial intelligence research front. So we have a dedicated AI research team of 20 plus very smart guys who are spending their time building an AI engine that allows us to understand what are the financial prospects of companies in the months and in the future, in the months to come. Now, the way that we are trying to assess this information, and currently the AI engine is primarily making use of financial, macro, and some other non-structured data. But as we are speaking, we are undertaking a very big project where ESG, non-financial information, is also part of the data pool that it is going effectively to impact the probabilistic prediction that we are making about the share price of a company in the future. And what we are finding so far is that it is quite a function of the horizon that you have of when you want to predict the share price for. So there are definitely within Arabesque a lot of different interesting projects that we are running. And if you take all the research that we have produced over the past 10 years that shows the correlation between non-financial information and financial performance, I feel that through AI, actually, we will be able to identify even more hidden patterns in the way that non-financial information impacts the financial performance.
That'll be really interesting to see. I'm excited to kind of see how that develops. With that, we are out of time. We went a couple minutes over, but I think it was worth it. So thanks again to all of the panelists. You all were excellent. This was a great conversation. I wish we had more time, but and thank you again to all of our audience members for some great questions. I hope you got as much out of that as I did. With that, I'll kick it back over to George.
Thank you, Billy. Thank you. You did a fantastic job. And thanks a lot to all your panelists. Very, very interesting discussion. I think we have reached the end of the first day of the conference. Tomorrow, speaking about machine learning that Gabriel referred to and quantitative tools that Anna Mary also referred to. Tomorrow, we're going to see how we can measure climate risks using machine learning techniques. We're going to hear on legislation fresh from the oven from the European Commission. And we're going to see how Swiss Re, which is a case study in Switzerland, has managed to adopt ESG practices. And of course, we're going to have another panel also moderated by Financial Times on sustainable banking and corporates. So with that, I would like once again to thank you all. And I would like to thank also the audience, and we're looking forward to your attendance and participation tomorrow. Have a nice evening or have a nice day.
Thank you.